Hey folks, in this episode I'm going to show you how to make this magic visual effects curve animation here. These curve animations are really easy to make, they're visually pleasing, it's easy to get them to loop. You could even render these out as billboards to import into a game engine, which you could then use as visual effects to your game. So without further ado, let's get to it. Open up Blender, I'll delete the default lamp, I'm going to delete the default cube, I'll then navigate to Edit, Preferences, and under Add-ons we're going to search for Node and then enable the node wrangler here. The second thing we're going to search for will be extra, and we're going to enable extra curve objects here. Once you've enabled those two, we're going to click this button and click Save Preferences, and that will ensure the add-ons load every time you load Blender. I'll just close this window here. So I'm going to hit numpad 7 in my 3D viewport to go into top view. I'm going to hit Shift A, I'm going to go curve, spirals, and that's a feature of the extra curve objects. And I'm going to select Archimedean. I'll orbit round just so I can see the front of this curve. I'll then navigate to the bottom left and expand the curve options down here. I'll increase the height to 2.5 meters and I'm going to increase the turns to 2. So in total, it's 5 meters high. I'll just collapse the curve spirals options over here, tap out of edit mode. I'm going to change my pivot point up here from median point to 3D cursor, and just ensure that your cursor is in the center of the world. If it's not, you can hit Shift C and that will recenter your cursor. I'll then tab into edit mode. I'm going to select this top point here. I'll then hit O to enable proportional editing. Alternatively, you can enable it by clicking this button here. I'll then click this button here and I'm going to enable connected only. I'll just hit numpad 1 to go into front view. I'm just going to zoom out slightly. I'll then hit S, which will scale. I'm going to hit Shift Z and that will scale on all axes excluding the Z axis. I'll then hit 0 and that will scale it in by 0. I will then increase the proportional editing fall off until the entire spiral is affected, excluding the very last point. I'm going to keep moving this until that very last point at the end down here stops moving. So I want that back in its original position. Okay, something around there should do absolutely fine. And now if I rotate round, you can kind of see what we've got there. Excellent. From here, I'm going to hit O to disable proportional editing. I'll hit numpad 7 to go into top view. I'm going to hit A to select all the vertices, Shift D to duplicate. I'll hit escape to lock it back in its original position. RZ180 to rotate it by 180 degrees and hit enter. I'll select all the vertices by hitting A, Shift D to duplicate, escape, so it locks back into its original position. RZ90, and that will rotate it by 90 degrees on the Z axis. Hit enter. I'll just hit A to select all the vertices again. Let's just see what we've got so far. Okay, it's looking quite good. I'll just hit numpad 7 to go into top view again. I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate. I'll escape it back in its original position. I'll then hit SX1 minus, and that will scale it by -1. So we've got the inverse, and now we've got this kind of spiral effect here going both ways. Excellent. Tab out of edit mode. I'll just hit numpad 1 to go into front view. With this object selected, I'll navigate to my outliner and I'm going to rename it to Level Up You Legend. I'll then click this icon up here and I'm going to enable all of these filters. I'll then hide that object from the viewport. In my 3D viewport, I'm going to hit numpad 7 to go into top view, Shift A, go curve and choose path. We're going to tab into edit mode. I'll navigate to the top up here. I'm going to enable snap. I'll then hit G and I'm going to snap this first point to the center of the world. For this next part, you've got creative freedom, so I recommend making your own shape rather than just following me point for point. So the only rule I have applied for myself is the start point must end here and the end point must end somewhere along this line or somewhere along this line. And I'm also going to be only working in this quadrant here, so that's within the plus X and within the plus Y. I won't be entering these zones around here. So just to give you an idea of what I'm doing, I'm going to select these 4 points here. I'm going to hit G. I'm going to bring these across over to there. I'll then select these 3 points. I'll hit G. I'll bring these across over to here. I'll select these 2. Hit G. Bring them across over to here. I'll select this one. G. Bring this across over to here. When you got to your last point, I'm going to hit E to extrude. I'll bring this down to here. I'm going to hit E to extrude again. I'll bring it around to there. Maybe I'll hit E. I'll bring it up to here. And so on and so forth until you've got a pattern that you like. I'll just continue this process and I'll get back to you as soon as I'm done. Okay, I've made the executive decision to change my mind, so I'm just going to select this last point here and I'm going to hit G and bring this down to the original position of the original point. So it basically starts and ends in the original position. I'll then hit numpad 1 to go into front view. I'll hit O to enable proportional editing. just ensure that you've got connected only selected. I'll then navigate to my outliner and re-enable the original curve. I'll then hit G, Z, and I'm going to snap it up to the top of that original curve. I'm going to increase my proportional editing until the entire curve is moving, except the very first point, to around about there. Obviously, this curve object protrudes out way too much in relation to our original curve, so I'm going to hit S, Shift Z, and I'm just going to scale it in to around about there. I'll navigate to my outliner, and I'm going to hide the original curve object from the viewport. I'm going to hit A, just to select all the vertices. I'm going to hit numpad 7 to go into top view. I'll hit O to disable proportional editing. I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate, escape it back in its original location. I'll then hit SX1 minus to scale it on the x-axis by -1. I hit A to select all the vertices. I'll just shimmy this over here. Shift D to duplicate, escape it back in its original position. SY1 minus. Hit enter. A to select all the vertices. Shift D to duplicate, escape it back in its original position. We'll then hit RZ90 and then hit enter. I'll tab out of edit mode. I'll navigate to my outliner and re-enable the original curve object. I'll then orbit round just to see what we've got. Okay, it's looking quite funky. And with the new curve object selected, I'm just going to zoom in. I'm going to tab into edit mode. I'll then toggle on X-ray view. And I'm going to select all of these vertices in the middle here. I'll hit numpad 1 to go into side view. I hit O to enable proportional editing. I'll then change the proportional fall off to sharp. I'll then hit S, Shift Z, and I'm just going to scale this in. I'll decrease my proportional editing to something around about there. Okay, excellent. Tab out of edit mode. I'll hit numpad 1 to go into front view. With the new curve object selected, I'm going to hold down Shift and left click select the old curve object. I'll then hit Control J, and that will join those as one object. I'll navigate to the curve data tab down here. I'm going to expand the geometry options, and I'm going to increase the bevel depth to, let's say, 0.01. I'll toggle off X-ray view. Before we move on, it's a good idea to save your project. So I'm going to go to File, Save As, and I'm going to save my project as like and subscribe. Thanks folks, you absolute legends. And then click Save As. Next up, I want to give this curve a bevel profile. So in your curve data tab over here, where it says bevel, we're going to enable this profile option. In fact, I'm just going to temporarily increase the depth just so we can see what we're doing a bit better. I'll also increase the resolution. We'll then navigate to this ramp here, and I'm going to add a point here. I'll then add a point here by left clicking. I'll also add a point here by left clicking. And now I'll add a point in the middle of this square here, and I'm just going to drag this down maybe to around about there. I'll also add a point here and drag this one down to around about there. Now you can see that we've got this profile. I'll navigate to my modifier tab over here. I'm going to click add modifier. We go to generate and we'll choose subdivision surface. I'm going to turn the render subdivisions down to 1. I'll then navigate to my curve data tab down here, and I might even decrease the resolution to 5 on the bevel. I think that should be absolutely fine. I'll just hit numpad 1 to go into front view. I want to be able to taper this curve, so I want it to start off thin, I want it to progressively get thicker, and then I want it to go thinner again towards the end. That's easy enough, and for the profile object, we're going to use a Bezier curve, so I'm just going to hit numpad 7 to go into top view. I'll hit Shift A, and I'll go curve, and we'll choose Bezier. I'll then hit G, X, and I'll just drag this across out of the way over to around about there. I'll then select this object here, navigate to your curve data tab over here, and under geometry where it says taper object, I'm going to click the side dropper and I'll select that Bezier curve. I'll select the Bezier curve. I'm going to tab into edit mode. I'll select this point here. If I hit R, it will still rotate around my cursor, so we need to change the pivot point from cursor to median point. I'll also disable my proportional editing. I'll then hit R, and I'm going to hold down Control to snap it in increments, and we're going to bring it round so it's completely flat. If I hit A to select all the handles, you can see that this handle is shorter than this one. So I'm just going to box select this control point here. I'm going to hit G, and I'm going to bring this in 3 units. I'll then select this control point here. I'll hit G, and I'll bring this in 3 units. I'll then hit A to select all the handles. I'm going to change my pivot point from median point to individual origins. I'll then hit S, hold down Control to scale it in increments. And as you can see, they're both scaling at the same size. Excellent. So with both your handles selected, I'm going to right click and I'm going to choose subdivide, and that will create an extra handle in the middle. And with this center handle selected, I'm going to hit G, Y, and bring this forward. And you can see that this is shaping our profile on our curve. Now the thing is, I don't want the beginning and the ends of the curve to go into absolute 0. I still want to maintain a bit of thickness. So with the middle curve handle selected, I'm going to hit numpad 7 to go into top view. I'll select this curve handle at the beginning and this curve handle at the end. I'll then hit G, Y, and I'll just bring them up 1 unit. Okay, I'll just tab out of edit mode. I'll now select this curve object here. If your viewport is lagging, we'll navigate to the modifiers tab. We'll click this button and disable it from the viewport. I'll then navigate back to my curve data tab over here. So we've got our taper object, which is this Bezier curve, which is controlling the thickness of the spline. We'll then collapse these bevel options here, and we'll expand the start and end mapping. So just to demonstrate, for the start factor, I'm going to set this to, let's say, 0.3. And for the end factor, I'm going to set this to, let's say, 0.7. Now, if I just go into the viewport, you can see that the taper isn't dynamic. It's basically just staying stationary. So the thickness never changes on this curve. But then if I was to go to my curve data tab over here and enable map taper, you can see that the taper changes dynamically, which is based on the start and end mapping of the spline. So if I was to reduce this start factor, you can see it's always going to be thin on the end. Excellent. So I'm going to set the start factor to 0, and I'm going to change the end factor to 1 just for now. In my viewport, I'm going to hit numpad 1, numpad period. I'll then hit Control S just to save. I'm going to go to my timeline and set the end frame to 480. In my timeline, I'm going to hit home, and that's just to ensure that we've got the entire timeline in view. I'm going to go to my render tab up here. If you're in Eevee, just enable ray tracing. I'm going to change mine to cycles. I'll also change the device type to GPU. I'll hit Control Alt numpad 0, and that will snap my camera to the viewport. I'll then select my camera. I'll navigate to my object data tab down here. I'll set the X location to 0, the Y location to -15 meters, and the Z location to 1.7 meters. I'll then hit enter. I'm going to ensure that the rotation on X is set to 90 and Y and Z is set to 0. And with the camera selected, I'm going to go to my camera data tab down here. I think I might increase the focal length to, let's say, 70mm. I'll then go back to my object data tab over here, and I'm going to have to drag it back on the y-axis just to ensure that everything's in frame to round about there. I'll then navigate to my camera data tab over here, and I'll increase the tilt shift on my y-axis until everything's in frame to round about there. Excellent. I'll select the curve object. I'll navigate to the curve data tab over here. I'll then reduce the end mapping to 0, so the start and end are set to 0. I'll add keyframes on the start and end. I'll skip to frame 40. I'll then change the end factor to 1, and I'll add a keyframe there. I'll then skip to frame 20, and for the factor start set to 0, I'm going to add a keyframe there. I'll then skip to frame 60. I'll change the start factor to 1, and I'll add a keyframe there. I'll also add a keyframe on the end factor, which is set to 1. Before we preview this, I'm just going to navigate to my output tab over here, and I'm going to change the frame rate to 30 FPS. I'll then navigate back to my curve data tab down here. I'm going to skip back to frame 1. I'll hit play, and you can see the animation. Excellent. So now all we need to do is loop this animation. That's easy enough. I'm just going to expand my timeline. I'll then skip to frame 80. In my timeline, I'm going to hit A, so I've got all the keyframes selected. Control C to copy. I'll then hit Control V to paste. I'll then skip to frame 160. I'll hit Control V. I'll skip to frame 240. I'll hit Control V. Skip to frame 320. Hit Control V. And we'll do the same for frame 400. Control V. And now, if I skip back to frame 1 and hit play, you should see a consistent loop. Excellent. Before we move on to materials, I want to animate the camera. In the 3D viewport, I'll hit Shift A, I'll go empty, and I'm going to choose sphere. I'll go to my empty data tab over here, and I'm going to increase the size to, let's say, 2 meters. I'll zoom out. I'll select my camera. I'll then hold down Shift, left click, select the empty object. I'll hit Control P, and we're going to set parent to object keep transform. So now, if I grab this empty object, hit G, you can see that the camera's mapped to the empty object. Excellent. We'll then navigate to the object data tab over here, and with your empty object selected and you're on frame 1, for the Z rotation set to 0, I'm going to add a keyframe there. I'll then skip to the last frame. I'll skip forward one more frame, so we're on frame 481, and under the Z rotation I'm going to type in 360. I'll then add a keyframe there. I'll decrease my timeline. I'll navigate to the bottom left of the 3D viewport until I see a crosshair. I'll left click and drag up, and that will open up a new window. I'll then change this from the 3D viewport to the graph editor. By default, your animation type will be set to Bezier, and we don't want this for the camera animation. So in short, Bezier, that will start off your animation slow, it will speed up, and then it will slow down towards the end, and we want the camera to move at a constant speed. So in your graph editor, with your empty object selected, hit A couple of times, and that will select all your keyframes. We'll then hit T, and we'll choose linear. And now that will give the camera animation a consistent speed. I'll navigate to my outliner, and I'll select the curve object. I'll go to my graph editor. I'm going to hit A to select all the keyframes. Control, middle mouse button to zoom in, and then just middle mouse button on its own. And I'll just keep doing this until I've got all of these highlighted. My defaults are set to linear. I don't want that for the curve object, so I'm going to hit T, and I'm going to choose Bezier. Yours should be set to Bezier by default, and this will just give the curve animation a smoother feel. Excellent. I'm going to hit numpad 1 to go into front view. Just going to zoom in. I just want a rough scope of where the top of this is going to be. At this point, this should be the top of the curve. Okay. So in the 3D viewport, with your cursor set to the center of the world, I'm going to hit numpad 1. I'll hit Shift A. I'm going to choose light, and I'll choose point. And with the point light selected, I'm going to hit G, Z, and I'm going to bring it up 5 units. And if we go to the Object Data tab over here, you can see on the Z location transform, it's set to 0.5. I'll then skip back to frame 1. I'll go to my Object Data tab over here. And with the Z set to 0.5, I'm going to add a keyframe there. If you remember, the curve animation loops on frame 60. So on frame 60, with your point light selected, we'll hit G, Z, and we'll bring it up to around about there. So that's 4.5 meters high. I'll then add a keyframe there. For the lamp, I want the animation interpolation type to follow the same interpolation as the curve object. And if you remember, that was Bezier. So in my graph editor, I'm going to hit A to select both of the keyframes. I'll then hit T, and I'm going to choose Bezier. We can now skip to frame 1, hit play, just to view the animation. Okay, excellent. We'll then skip to frame 79. And with your point light selected under your Object Data tab over here, we're going to add a keyframe on the Z location set to 4.5 meters. I'll then skip forward 1 frame, so we're on frame 80. I'm going to hit A to select all the keyframes. We'll then hit Control C to copy and Control V to paste. I'll just skip to frame 1. I'll hit play just to ensure the loop's working okay. Excellent. I'll then skip to frame 160. I'll hit Control V to paste. I'll skip to frame 240. Control V to paste again. 320. Control V. And one last time, I'll skip to frame 400. Hit Control V. And now if I skip back to frame 1 and hit play, you should see that this loops seamlessly. Excellent. And if I hit numpad 0 to go into camera view, you should see that we're orbiting around as well. I'm just going to skip back to frame 1. I'll then change this window from the graph editor to the shader editor. I'll hit N to hide the N panel. I'll hit Control S to save the project. I'll then hit play. And with the point light selected, we're going to go to our light data tab over here. I'm going to increase the power to, let's say, 1000 watts. And maybe I'll increase the radius to 2 meters. I'll then go into rendered view. I'll navigate to my world tab down here. And I'll decrease the strength to 0. I'm going to go to my render settings over here. I'm going to increase the noise threshold to maybe 0.025. I'm going to change the max samples to 256. I may increase this a bit later. I'll navigate and expand these light options over here. I'll disable light tree. I'll expand light paths. I'll scroll down, and I'm also going to disable reflective and refractive caustics. In my 3D viewport, I'm going to hit Shift A. I'll go Mesh, and I'm going to choose Plane. Tab into Edit mode, and with all the vertices selected, I'm going to hit S20 to scale it up by 20. Tab out of Edit mode. I'm going to hit Control 5. And that will add a subdivision surface at level 5. So if I go to my modifiers over here, I'll increase the render subdivisions by 5. And maybe for the viewport, we'll drop this down to 3. And with the ground plane selected, I'm going to click New. And that will add a new material. We'll rename it to Ground. I'll zoom in. I'll change it to Metallic. And I'm going to set a roughness of, let's say, 0.124. I'll then select the point light. I'll navigate to the Object Data tab over here. I'll navigate down until I see Visibility. Expand these options, scroll down, and then disable glossy, and that ensures that this point light doesn't affect any gloss in our scene. I'll select the curve object, numpad 0 to go into camera view. I'll click new. I'll rename the material to Hype This Tutorial. In my shader editor, I'm going to hit Shift A, I'm going to go color, and we'll choose mix color. I'll pop that there. I hit Shift D to duplicate. With this mixed color node selected on socket A, I'm going to change this to a green color, maybe something around there perhaps. And for socket B, I'll change the color of this one to blue, maybe something around there. I'll then plug the result from this mixed color into socket A of this mixed color node. I'll then change the color of socket B on this mixed color node to maybe something around there perhaps. I'll then plug the result from this mixed color node into the base color of the principal BSDF. I'll set the roughness to 1. I'll then hit Shift A. I'm going to go input and I'm going to choose layer weight. I'll pop that down there. I'll plug the facing socket into the factor of this mixed color node and I'm going to set the blend to 0.9. Maybe I can just disable my overlays so we can see what we're doing. I'll then take this layer weight. I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate and I'll pop that over here. Maybe I'll just drag it over here slightly. I'll set the blend on this one to 0.3. I'll then connect the Fresnel socket to the mix factor of this color node. I'll hit Shift A, I'm going to go converter and I'll choose color ramp and I'll pop that in between the layer weight node and the mix color node. I'll then select the black flag on the color ramp and I'm going to change the position to 0.15. I'll then drag this white flag across all the way to, let's say, 0.3, maybe 0.35. I'll just increase my 3D viewport. I'll then scrub my timeline back slightly, just so I can see the reflections. Maybe I can decrease the roughness on the ground plane. So I'll select my ground plane. And for the roughness, I'm going to bring this down to 0.1. I don't want anything to render outside of my camera view. So I'm going to navigate to my output tab over here. And I'll enable render region. Excellent. I'll now navigate to my material preview up here. I'll click this button and I'll enable scene lights and scene world. And now if I hit play, we can kind of preview the animation. So again, you can render yours out in Eevee. I'm going to choose cycles, so I'm just going to render out a test frame. So I'm just going to hit F12 and render out a test frame. Okay, it's not looking too bad. I'll just hit escape. I'll then navigate to my compositing tab up here. I'm going to enable use nodes, and with this view tab selected, just enable backdrop. I'll then decrease my timeline. I'll click fit. I'll zoom in. I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to go filter and we'll choose glare and I'll pop that in between there. I'm going to change it from streaks to fog glow and I'll reduce the strength to, let's say, 0.5. That's all I want to do for compositing. I'll just go to layout. I'll just skip to another frame, maybe something around the mid mark, round about there. I'll hit F12 just to render out another test frame. Okay, I'm kind of happy with that. Of course, you can change your materials, you can add subdivision surface, you can animate noise texture masks, which can be plugged into emission values. Don't be afraid to experiment. So I'm just going to close this window here. I'll navigate to my output tab over here. Click this folder icon down here. Choose a file location where you want to save your image sequence. I've got mine in a folder called Level Up You Legends. Then click Accept. Select a file format. If you're going with PNG, go with RGB. 16-bit or 18-bit is absolutely fine, but if you were to render this out for the purpose of billboards for Game Engine, then go with RGBA, so you've got alpha. But if you do go for RGBA, you are going to have to go to your render settings, scroll down until you see film, and then enable transparent. You'll probably also have to remove the ground plane, of course. I don't want the transparent, so I'll just toggle that off. I'll then navigate back to my output tab over here. For me, I'm going to choose a file format of OpenEXR with a codec of DWAA lossy, and that will reduce my file size whilst increasing dynamic range for post-production. I'll then hit Ctrl S to save my project, and then it's simply a case of hitting Ctrl F12, and that will render out your image sequence. Join me on Patreon as a free member and you'll have access to this file alongside other Blender files from previous tutorials. That's the tutorial in a nutshell. I hope you found this useful. If you did, please click like, hype and subscribe. It really helps my channel. Have a great day, level up, and thanks for watching.